Hi, I'm Tran. As Mike mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of a startup in London called Lightbox, and today I'm going to talk to you about Android. So basically, what Lightbox builds is a mobile photo sharing service. And we launched this summer, and so far I've gotten more than 500,000 downloads on the Android market. And the reason why we created the company was we saw that there were many, many other companies out there who were focusing on iPhone as either their only platform or as their primary platform, and they were treating Android as a second-class citizen. And we saw an opportunity to create a company that would focus on Android as our primary platform. So Lightbox today only develops for Android. And this graph here is going to show you why. So what you see in the orange line there is the cumulative number of iPhones that have been shipped for each quarter since it was launched. And overlaid on the same time period in green is the number of Android phones that have been shipped since the Android platform was launched. And where the graph ends at basically November of last year when we founded Lightbox. And what you can start to see the beginnings of here is Android appears to be growing faster than iPhone did at the same time in its history. And then look at what has happened in the last year. Right? Android has significantly outpaced iPhone. And today, it's at 115 million devices globally. More than 500,000 new Android devices are being activated every single day. And Android is winning in both developed as well as developing markets. So in the United States, it has 45% market share and is already the #1 smartphone OS. In Europe, it's currently at #2, and Symbian is #1. However, Android is gaining market share and Symbian is losing market share. So I would suspect within a year, Android will be #1 in Europe also. And in China, it's believed to be that Android has at least 50% market share. And so this is a market where there are more mobile users than there are the entire population of the United States. So you can imagine how big it would be to win in China. Now, one of the main problems with the Android platform is what's known as fragmentation. So what you see, this chart here is usage data for Lightbox for the month of October, and it's broken down by Android OS. The blue piece represents Eclair, which is the version of Android that was released almost 2 years ago. And my developers would love to stop supporting that version, but we can't because it has a pretty significant amount of market share. And what's more troubling is the green section, that's ginger red. That's the version of Android that was launched 1 year ago. And it still has less than 50% market share. And in a few weeks, Google is going to launch Ice Cream Sandwich, which is the next version of Android. And so we're going to be soon in a situation where we're going to have to support at least 4 different versions of the Android OS in parallel. Now, what's even crazier is if you do the breakdown by device. So in our usage data, there are only 3 phones that have more than 5% market share, and each come from a different manufacturer. But together, they only comprise 25% of our usage. For us to gain the remaining 75%, that's 190 different phones. If you can believe that, in a single month, there are more than 190 phones that we have to support at a single time. Now, these graphs sort of look scary, but it's not as bad as you think. It's, we're a pretty small team. We have 3 Android developers, and we're able to support all these different variants. So it's a significant amount of friction that we have to deal with that the iPhone developers don't have to deal with. And if you go back to the OS chart that I showed you earlier, there's this little purple slice. That represents Honeycomb, which is the tablet version of Android. And in our usage data, it's basically not significant in terms of usage. And in terms of devices, we only see 2 devices being used, which is the Samsung Galaxy Tab and the Motorola Zoom. And the reason why I think that the Android tablets haven't taken off in the same way as the iPad has is because fundamentally a tablet is a media consumption device. And Google didn't launch the Honeycomb tablets with a great media experience. They, to this day, still don't have a music store. They only very recently launched a video store, but it only covers US and UK, and the selection is very, very poor. Secondly, there are actually very, very few apps today that are directly targeted towards Android tablets. And that's partly because of the developer tools. If you try to use the Honeycomb emulator, you'll find it's incredibly slow and it's pretty much unusable. And Google didn't do anything to seed developers with tablet devices before they launched. Now Google is starting to correct that. So if you get an invitation to go to a Google developer event, such as the Android Developer Labs, you definitely should accept it, because there's a very good chance they'll give you a free tablet just for attending. And then finally, the Android tablets, the first generation of Android tablets were priced in the same price range as the iPad. And I think given these shortcomings, if you had to pay the same amount of money, you would choose the iPad over a Honeycomb tablet. Now, things are potentially changing, because very shortly, Amazon is going to launch the Kindle Fire, which is their Android tablet. And it's going to come with a full Amazon media experience of books, music, and videos. So even if there isn't a great app ecosystem, it will still be a compelling device. But more importantly, the Kindle Fire is priced at less than $200, so half the price of an iPad. And as we've seen with the HP touchpad, right, people will buy an obsolete device if it's priced correctly. And if you consider sort of the entire Kindle franchise as tablets, Amazon is already the second most successful producer of tablets. And rumors are that the pre-orders for the Kindle Fire are exceeding the pre-orders that the iPad had when it first came out. But once again, we have more problems. They're launching this only in the United States, and they forked an older version of Android. So there's going to be yet another sort of bastardized version of Android that we developers are going to have to support going forward. Now, the other problem with Android is the developer tools are not very mature. So if you're coming from a web background or an iOS background, you'll probably find creating Android apps pretty frustrating. You end up having to hand code a lot of XML and write a lot of sort of boilerplate code just to do very, very simple things. The UI widgets and libraries are not nearly as polished as the iOS counterpart, so you have to do a lot of work to make your app look good. And then lots of the Android API is not really well documented. So as a developer, you'll be spending a huge amount of time on Stack Overflow trying to learn how to do anything sophisticated on the Android platform. Now, given sort of how not fully baked the Android platform is, my recommendation is if you're going to attack Android, you should build it natively, because you don't really want another half-baked layer on top of a half-baked sort of platform. And then the other thing that we learned with Lightbox is try to avoid using parts of the hardware that could vary between phones. So we have all sorts of special case code in our system that says, like, if the image comes in from an LG phone, we flip it upside down. If it comes in from a front-facing camera, an HTC phone, we have to rotate it. So there are all sorts of hardware-specific things that we've had to work through. But the great thing about the Android platforms is they have this thing called intents, so that different Android apps can work together. So what you should do is you should focus on kind of what is your core competency, what is the important thing you do, and then if you need to take a photo or do anything else to use the hardware, just rely on a different Android app to do that for you and let other developers sort of fight through that pain. Now, because of the fragmentation issues, you're going to have to extensively test your app before releasing it. So, if you can afford to, you should buy a bunch of different Android phones from different manufacturers and of different form factors. And one strategy you might want to employ is give the high-end phones to your developers, and then give the low-end phones to their girlfriends, so that if your app doesn't perform really well on the lower-end phones, the girlfriends will let them know, and it'll get fixed. Now, if you can't afford to buy a lot of phones, you can actually do testing in a phone store. Because one of the great things about Android is you can install apps over email. So if you walk into a phone store, usually the phones there will have internet access, and every phone has to have a Gmail account. So just run the Gmail app, find out what the email address is, and then email your app to that email address, and then you can then install it and run it in the store. And typically, all the phones in the store will have the same email address. So you send it once, and then you can run it on all the different phones there. But even with this, you're still not going to be able to test out against 190 different phones. So you really need to have people in the field try it out for you. And the other great thing about Android is the Android market has no gatekeepers. whatsoever. So the moment you upload an app to the Android market, it immediately goes live. So one thing that we did was we employed the Android market to run a fairly large beta test. So you basically upload your app to the Android market under a secret name that nobody would ever search for, and then you go recruit a bunch of beta testers from around the world to go try out your app and give you feedback. One thing that some other people do is they'll upload their app to the Android market, but then only target a single country that that isn't very important to them. And then once they fix they've learned what's wrong and fixed all the bugs, then they open it up to the rest of the world. And final thing I want to point out to you is, just like the iTunes App Store, your visibility in the Android market is basically going to determine whether you're going to be successful or not. So what you see this graph here is the weekly downloads of the Lightbox app. So shortly after we launched, we got really positive coverage in most of the major tech blogs. And you see that we got a big bump in installs, and we were quite happy at that time about that. But then a few weeks later, Google added us to the featured apps list. And you see there's this massive increase in traffic, and our servers almost melted down the day they did that. And so you can see that impact of the being featured was 7 times more valuable to us than all the press coverage. Now, how do you get featured? It's actually quite simple, right? It's build a really, really high-quality app. And what I would say is the Google guys really hate it when you build your app first for the iPhone, and then you build a slightly inferior version for Android, especially if the Android version has the same UI as the iPhone version, because there are lots of small UI nuances that are different between the two platforms. So whereas if you come directly to the Android platform, you build something specifically for Android, that's going to greatly increase your chances of getting featured. Secondly, add tablet support. Even though this might not get you lots of users today, it's going to help you stand out from the crowd, because as I mentioned, there are not that many tablet apps. And so if you build something specifically for a tablet, you're going to get Google's attention, and they're going to be much more likely to feature you. Finally, reach out to the Android developer advocates. The 3 names I've listed here are the 3 advocates that cover Google. They're extremely accessible. You can find them at most Android developer events, as well as on Google+. So once you've done the things I mentioned above, just go reach out to them and give them a demo of your app. And if they're a big fan, they'll go talk to their colleagues in California and campaign for your app to get featured. And finally, I'm going to end with sort of what I think are some opportunities in the Android world. So given all the challenges I mentioned, here's some areas where I think that if you're looking for a new project or a new business to start, where I think you could add a lot of value. First of all, better UI libraries, right? So what Android needs is the equivalent of jQuery. A library so that developers can just focus on building the UI for their app, and you take care of all the underlying issues dealing with the different OS variations, the different screen sizes, whatnot. Secondly, with Lightbox, we found that it's extremely difficult to do large-scale image processing under Android today. We've had to write our own libraries and do all sorts of hacks to make it possible to do what we do. And so if one of you goes out there and creates this really great library, you would enable a whole new generation of Android media apps to exist. Secondly, Android really needs better development and testing tools. So what the iOS world has is this visual interface builder where you can sort of drag and drop the UI. It would be fantastic if somebody built the equivalent for Android. You would save developers so much time. Secondly, testing, right? If you had a service where I could upload my app and you would test it across 190 phones for me with a single click, I mean, that's something I definitely would pay for because it greatly increases my team's productivity. And finally, going back to these tablet apps, again, if you want to make the bet that one day Android tablets will be successful, now is a good time to start because there's not a huge amount of competition, and you're much more likely to get featured today. All right. And with that, I can just turn it over to questions. All right. Yep.
Hey, I just forgot to bring in the mic too. So, any questions? If you're interested, my colleagues have microphones prepared. One over there. I also have one question for you. They say that the Android apps are very difficult to be monetized, and because you have different people. I mean, the people that actually use Android phones have not that deeper pockets as the ones that use iOS. Is that a myth, or is
I think that the challenge for Android is it's because I would say the reason why iOS apps are much more successful, I think, at paid downloads is because of iTunes. Because Apple has had years to build up this massive credit card database of hundreds of millions of people so that they can make purchasing with one click. Whereas on the Android market, you have to purchase using Google Checkout, and I mean, how many people here have Google Checkout accounts? Right, almost nobody, right? So that's like a huge friction point, having to pull out your credit card. So I think that on Android, you can't monetize necessarily in the same way that you would under iOS. You would either have to look more towards things like advertising models, or wait for carrier billing to get integrated so that you can buy an app and it just appears on your Vodafone bill.
Hi, Ty. I'm Alex. Just want to ask you related to testing. Have you tried U-Test or some other kind of like crowdsourcing testing?
I haven't specifically looked at any of those platforms. Like right now, we have a fairly sizable number of sort of users who are our beta testers, and basically what we're doing is we're relying on them to tell us what the problems are.
Because one of the things you mentioned last was testing on 190 devices, and I think U-Test can help you with that.
Okay, I'll take a look at it.
So why are you guys not moving to iOS? You said it's easier to build an application there, right? Why don't you do that?
Well, my opinion is, there are lots of great apps and on iOS, lots of developers targeting that platform, and and we see a much bigger opportunity in the Android world. So rather than we're a small team, so rather than kind of have two mediocre apps on two platforms, we'd rather have one great app on one platform. And you'll see, like, if you look at Flipboard, Instagram, and a lot of those companies, you'll see that they've made similar decisions. They've decided to focus on one platform.
Hello. Could you tell us some numbers from your business? I mean, how many customers, which is the revenue, and maybe which is how do you promote your product? Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we've had more than 500,000 downloads so far. So we've been out for just over 4 months now. We have not started yet working on a monetization plan. We're currently just focused on user acquisition, and largely, we are growing virally because in our case, we're a social photo app. So every time somebody takes a photo, they're sharing it to Twitter and Facebook, and that's how people are finding out about Lightbox.
Thank you.
Alex Balan, Defender. A quick question, somewhat related to what Bogdan asked earlier. Do you have any studies or something like that regarding the buyer persona on Android? I mean, at least estimated figure of what percentage of people actually buy stuff on Android? 1%, 0.5%, I don't know, 10?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I suspect it is significantly lower than on iOS. As I mentioned, I think that you will have to look at different business models, much more likely an advertising-related business model on Android in the short term.
Any more question? Yeah, Mickey?
Hi, what differentiates you guys from apps like Instagram, for example? How do you see competition with them? Why are you cannibalizing their users as well? Or what is their USP in terms?
No Android user can use Instagram, and no iPhone user can use Lightbox.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.